Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As part of the 2018 MOOC of the GIZ program, Soil Protection and Rehabilitation for Food Security, I'm going to talk about institutions. I'm an institutional economist working at the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, and my main field of interest is natural resource governance. So I want to give you some background which should help you to ask the right question with regard to institutions for your specific case. So let us ask a few questions. In the first place, why do we want to influence policies? We can see policies as an instrument, as a way of influencing behavior. Or then the next question would be, what can policies do to influence behavior? Or even more generally, how can we influence behavior? In a society, one person's actions affect other people. And in order to live peacefully together, we try to coordinate. We are adjusting our actions. So influencing behavior as the coordination of people. We develop norms, rules and laws to coordinate. And these norms, rules and laws we call institutions. So if I'm going to talk over the next half an hour about institutions, then I'm talking about norms, rules and laws, and not about organizations, a way how the term institution is also very often used. So that leads me to the definition of governance, of land governance. And I want us to shift the focus a little bit from policy only to land governance. Land governance as the laws, regulations, rules and norms which organize the processes driving land management. And there are diverse institutions which influence people's actions. To better understand governance, it is important to be aware of different types of institutions. And one way how we are typically categorize institutions is to distinguish between hierarchies, markets, and cooperation. Hierarchies are institutions where there is one powerful actor who has a monopoly of power and can set and enforce rules. So the state is a typical example for this, but also many organizations work on the basis of hierarchies. Then we have markets. On markets, there are transaction partners with equal power who exchange goods or services. And in its pure form, on pure markets, the contracts are self-enforcing. So I only get something if I give what the transaction partners, what we have agreed upon. And the third one are hybrids, often referred to as cooperation, self-organization. In this case, actors decide jointly on rules, maybe establish some leadership mechanisms, some leadership roles, but most importantly, they exchange goods and services in a more informal way. So why is it relevant to think about these different types of institutions in the context of land degradation? We should be aware that the behavior of land managers is influenced by a mix of incentives originating from these different institutions. We follow laws, respond to market incentives, organize ourselves in associations, and all this is affecting how we manage land. So if you are aware of these mechanisms in your specific case, you can ask yourself, if I want to change actual behavior, where are my entry points, where are your entry points to do this? And if you believe that you can influence policies, it is worth to think about where are the entry points of a policymaker to influence actual behavior. To answer these questions helps us to be aware that coordination mechanisms have comparative advantages depending on the context. Yeah? So one important dimension of context is what kind of benefits or costs are affected by land degradation or by land management. So let me explain this using an example. In one of our previous projects, we worked in northern Namibia. And there we face a situation that we have still large areas of nearly pristine forest, while farmers are clearing that forest at an accelerating rate to make new fields. Now we compared the provision of different ecosystem services before and after the clearing. And we mapped the ecosystem services according to different types. And we used for the classification a good typology, which was introduced by Ostrom and scholars. And you find it, for instance, in Elinor Ostrom's book, Understanding Institutional Diversity. Now, what you can see in the diagram here is that there are different types of goods, and we distinguish them by subtractability or competition in use and their excludability. Subtractability or competition in use means how strongly does my enjoyment of a good affect other people. So imagine you are at a meeting and you go to the buffet. How much food I am taking is affecting how much food the people behind me are getting. The other dimension is the excludability, and this means how costly, how difficult is it to exclude somebody from the enjoyment of that good, that ecosystem service. Now what you see in our diagram is that in the lower right corner, where the private goods are, there is fodder, there are crops, the food from the crops, and these ecosystem services, which are more strongly related to the fields, they are becoming stronger. They are provided more intensively after the clearing, which is symbolized by the green color. And interestingly, these goods are private goods, which on the one hand have the feature of strong competition in use, but they are easy to exclude. And this low cost of excluding somebody from the use, from the enjoyment of the good, makes them suitable to be traded in markets. It makes it possible to exchange them and to control them. But what we also see in our diagram is that the private goods which are produced after the clearing are in strong competition to common pool resources and to public goods, which both share the feature of high costs of exclusion. It's more difficult to exclude other people from its enjoyment. So in the case of common pool resources, this is, for instance, the use of pastures, wild fruits, but also timber. So different typical products you can get from the forest. And we observe that these kind of ecosystem services are diminished after clearing the forest. And this can be strongly linked to the fact that it's difficult to exclude people from its enjoyment. Yeah? If it's difficult to exclude, then there is a temptation for many people to go there and just take what they can take. And at the same time, this difficulty of exclusion also means that people are hesitant to invest in the good or the ecosystem service. They cannot be sure that they will enjoy any benefits resulting from that investment, because everybody can come and enjoy it. And there is a temptation to free ride on the others. So let the others provide. Anyway, nobody can prevent me from using the good. And if everybody thinks like this, this will lead to a situation where the good is underprovided and overexploited. There are many examples where it has been demonstrated that, in particular with cooperation mechanisms, but also a combination of market and state interventions, these goods are managed in a sustainable way. It's not a trap. It's not Harden's tragedy of the commons, which really is like a law. But we have to be aware that these challenges, these institutional challenges, need to be addressed by institutions if we want to manage them in a sustainable way. And public goods, on the top left corner, share the feature of common pool resources that it's difficult to exclude somebody from its enjoyment. And there again, we have this temptation of not providing, not contributing to investments into these goods, and in this way, the good is underprovided because everybody thinks in the same way. So, what I want to make you aware of is that the governance of these situations is an interplay of market hierarchies and cooperation institutions for all of these ecosystem services. Yeah? So public goods typically, because it's so difficult to exclude, they are in a traditional form managed through state rules, laws, and such kind of institutions. While lately there are also more innovative instruments developed where there are kind of state-regulated markets evolving, for instance, payments for ecosystem services. So it's important to understand this interplay of the institutions in the context of land degradation and land management. Yeah? So ask yourself, for your specific case, which benefits, ecosystem services and goods are affected by the land management? And then ask yourself which institutions can now or potentially play a role in mitigating any negative impacts. And then the next question would be, how can we influence these institutions which are of critical importance? So you heard already that I talked about, on the one hand, how much is taken from an ecosystem service or a resource, and the investments in maintaining them and contributing to the continuous and sustainable provision of that good. So let me ask a few questions which you can ask yourself as well in your case. Who is contributing to the continuous and sustainable production of ecosystem services? And who enjoys, benefits, or experiences costs of the ecosystem service? There is an issue of scale, for instance. Think back of our example from Namibia. In the public good corner, there have been a lot of goods, like for instance, carbon sequestration, which are enjoyed by beneficiaries on a very large scale. So the individual action of a land user is having a very small impact on an individual beneficiary of a stable climate. So there is a long way, a strong disconnect, and there are very marginal links between these. And yet, on a large scale, the cumulative land management activities and the cumulated benefits of the different beneficiaries play an important role. So I'm asking you, are there maybe groups or individuals who enjoy a particular benefit but do not contribute? Yeah? If you want to influence policies, keep this in mind. There is a typical pattern to blame land users who cause degradation. But why should only they pay the costs of sustainable land management, while other people, often much more wealthy, enjoy the benefits of the sustainable land management without any contribution. And in this context, it's interesting to ask, is there maybe an untapped willingness to contribute, willingness to pay? Now, let's add another dimension to the whole picture. Yeah? Think again of our Namibia case. Now we have all these different institutions who play together, who are interacting with each other. And there are different ways of how they can interact with each other. So one interaction could be that they are totally unrelated. Typically this is our least concern, while we could think maybe there is an untapped potential. Then the second situation is they are in conflict with each other. Yeah? Imagine there is a customary law which prohibits that trees are cut, while a statutory law is permitting it. So this provides conflicting incentives to people, to land users. Then there is a situation where institutions are not in direct conflict with each other, but there are conflicting incentives. Think of a subsidy, an energy subsidy, which is encouraging pumping of water, while at the same time there are laws which are preventing or which are trying to prevent the wastage of water. And then we have the probably most interesting situation where institutions are in harmony with each other, and that sounds like what we want. But even there are traps. It's possible, and this is the best case, that the two institutions are reinforcing each other. So, for instance, I carry a strong norm that I don't want to litter and I don't want to throw around my waste. And then there is a law which is also prohibiting littering. And I feel that this is supporting me and it raises my confidence that also other people are not going to litter. But there is also the situation that one institution is undermining another one. And there is a very beautiful example from an Israeli kindergarten which illustrates this. In this situation, the caretakers of the kindergarten were unhappy about the fact that the parents are picking up their children always late. And in order to change this situation, they introduced a fine. So if the parents are coming late, they are going to pay a fine. And now guess what happened? When they introduced the fine, the parents came even later. So it undermined their intrinsic moral value of not being too late, maybe a bit too late, but not too late. And they now rather paid the fine, and this norm was undermined. So we should be aware of such situations when we think about this interplay of institutions and how to change them. So smart land policies take into account the diverse existing institutions and their interactions, in contrast to assuming an almighty state. Scientists and civil society activists love to blame policymakers for not listening to their arguments. And then, if they are successful to convince the policymakers and the policymakers make smart policies, but these policies in many cases do not change actual behavior, they blame again the weak state. We need to be aware that the enforcement capacity of any state is limited. Society's harmony strongly depends on shared values. Especially in Western societies, we strongly believe in the rule of law. But who is really aware of the laws? Who really knows the laws? Our law books are so thick and they are so comprehensive. It takes years to just get a feeling, I would say, where to find the right laws for the right context. And yet, we are living most of the times in harmony with each other. And this is because our norms, our moral is guiding us. We know intuitively from our education what is right and what is wrong. So in the context of land degradation, this teaches us that we should build policies on existing pro-soil values. Now, what are pathways to effective policies? In the first place, of course, it is very important to understand the causal relations between actions and land degradation. This evidence is typically the starting point for scientists and civil society representatives when they feel policies should be changed. I would argue, in addition to that, we need to have a good understanding of the context. The context in terms of the natural resources, also the values of the people involved, but in particular of the institutions related to the costs and benefits which are affected by the land degradation. And if we have this understanding, it will be much easier for us to find entry points, for instance, policies, to influence the institutions and to influence the actual behavior. In this context, it is important to be aware that there are no superior institutions, and if a certain governance framework is working in one context, it doesn't mean it works somewhere else. There are no blueprints, there are not the panaceas. So it is important that governance frameworks are adapted to the social ecological system of the specific case. And this understanding leads us to a search we are searching less for the superior institution or the superior governance, but we are rather looking for the processes and develop the processes which help actors to develop an effective governance framework in a specific situation. So it is of great importance to develop the institutional capacity of diverse actors to develop adapted policies. And in many situations, participatory multi-stakeholder processes can help designing policies and implementation strategies which are effective. Multi-stakeholder processes are perceived to be costly, then they are costly. But if the outcomes are more sustainable and if they are more effective, then it might be worth to invest these additional costs. As a summary, I'm giving back to you again a number of questions which you can ask for your case. I have asked them before, and let me repeat them again. Which costs and benefits are affected by land degradation in your specific case? Who contributes to the maintenance or the reduction of benefits and costs? And who enjoys or experiences them? Which hierarchical, state, market, or corporation institutions affect the maintenance or reduction and the experience of costs and benefits? And then again, in your context, which cultural norms support sustainable land management? Can you recall stories of fairy tales with soil health aspects? And I encourage you to think about examples where soil-related norms, community rules, customer and statutory laws, or any other bodies of institutions strengthen or are in conflict with each other, where there are synergies or conflicts. And I'm strongly convinced that if you answer these questions for your case, you will have greater ideas
or you have great ideas how to influence governance towards more sustainable land management. Thank you very much.